Welcome back to the 1-0 podcast brought to you by Penn State Student Affairs. I'm Seth Engle,
I'm Zach Allen.
and we are just a day or two away from Penn State, Michigan. Huge game. It's a fate deciding match for Penn State, who lost to Ohio State a couple weeks ago. This is that next test when you're, trying to make a college football playoff for the first time in the last year of a four-team format. Zach, how are you kind of feeling, ahead of this one? I know Michigan has been in the news for more than just this game. It's been with the sign stealing scandal. What are your takeaways from that? Do you think that at all impacts, Saturday's game?
I mean, if they did steal the signs, it's obviously going to impact the game in some way. But I think even outside of that, Michigan has by far probably college football's best defense. They're the only team in the country allowing less than 10 points per game. Number two is Ohio State, and we all saw how that went when Penn State took the field in the horseshoe. The thing that Penn State does have on its side is Beaver Stadium and the home field advantage, which I think will keep this game closer. But I mean, I just after Ohio State, I think all confidence was really lost in these big time games, especially when you take into account James Franklin's record in these types of games. The only difference really, it's Michigan's probably a better opponent than Ohio State, in my opinion, despite the ranking. The only difference is Penn State's at home for this one.
Yeah, I mean, I understand on paper why Michigan might kind of look like maybe the most complete team in the country, but you got to look at their schedule here, and there are definitely some question marks considering the fact that they haven't played a ranked opponent. Like this is, even Ohio State had played Notre Dame and Penn State, and Penn State had that, Ohio State game, even at Iowa, and West Virginia even is a better team than I think anyone that Michigan has faced. Those growing pains that you saw from Drew Aller in the offense the first time they played a true opponent against Ohio State. Do you think that we'll see maybe something similar from Michigan when they have their first crack at a tough opponent?
I mean, that also brings up a good point I meant to make in the first when I first talked about it. I think there will be a little there will be this will be a test for Michigan. They haven't played anybody. I don't think they've played one ranked opponent. They haven't played anybody really worth mentioning. And you don't, even if you're the number one team, most tested team on the planet, you don't just walk into Beaver Stadium and expect an easy game in front of what'll probably be 110,000 fans. I know they say 107,000 strong, but for games like this, it's going to be sold out. So I think that really is a concern. Um, Michigan has played great. Don't get me wrong. They've looked like the most complete team in the country. But there's something to be said about, heading into November and you haven't been tested and, you might be the favorite to win the Big Ten conference championship. I mean, this month is going to be, really telling for Michigan with Ohio State in the last week of the season as well. But yeah, it's there's definitely going to be some growing pains, but I think Michigan's just a good enough team to overcome it. They're leading the Big Ten in scoring while leading country defensively in points allowed. Again, that can be skewed by the lack of a tough opponent. But yeah, I think there will be a little bit of growing pains considering Penn State's offense has also looked improved at least last week.
I mean, that's what I was going to get into too, because I mean, he talked about lacking confidence, after the Ohio State game, which I guess we did see against Indiana. But I mean, last week, Penn State showed, mass improvement on all fronts.
Yeah,
Their
it's
offense was spectacular. They had guys on defense even step up. Um, you think that maybe Drew Aller has found that stride now after throwing that first interception and the game winner at Indiana. Has he clicked?
yeah, he's looked like it, and I think it kind of goes back to the point of Michigan not playing anybody because Drew Aller had his, welcome to the Big Ten moment against Ohio State. All of Penn State has already been tested now because of that game. It's not like they're walking to into Michigan being untested. And like you said, even West Virginia, they're a Hail Mary away from being 7-2, and that was to open the season. And you have Iowa, who Penn State dominated. Penn State's been tested, maybe not to the level of Ohio State consistently. But I think those growing pains against top teams in the country have probably run their course for the most part. I think Maryland was just what Penn State fans wanted to see from the start from Dante Cephas and the offense. And I mean, I think, I feel like the whole thing before Drew threw his first interception was, oh, he's trying to be too perfect and trying to avoid that. Maybe if he throws one, it'll benefit him. I think it really has. Um, Ever since that touchdown to Keandre Lambert-Smith, I know last week I was kind of saying you can't really say one throw, and all of a sudden the offense looks like a different beast, but it did against Maryland, and Maryland wasn't a bad team either. It's not like they went up against UMass and clicked. It was a Big Ten conference opponent, and I think Drew Aller's kind of found his footing. Granted, Maryland's not known for their defense like Michigan and Ohio State are, but I think Drew Aller is starting to find his footing.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I don't think Maryland's anything great right now. It
No,
was like I said a while back. I mean, this is like Maryland started hot. People are like, okay, maybe this could be a trap game. It's the same old Maryland. It happens. It does happen every year. Like they'll start hot.
yeah,
Maybe they have a close game against an opponent they shouldn't be so close with, and then they go on to destroy their season, and they're in jeopardy of making a bowl game. I want to get into the wide receivers a little bit, but first, let's give a quick message for our sponsor, Student Affairs. There may be some bad calls during the game, but you can make the right call. If you see an alcohol-related emergency, such as someone stumbling, incoherent, or passed out, call 911 and stay with the person in trouble. There are laws in place to protect you. Penn State's responsible action protocol protects students when they seek help for a peer. If you choose to drink this weekend, do it safely. Drink water and eat a snack. Take your time and set a limit. Look out for yourself and for others. No matter how you celebrate a Penn State win this weekend, do it safely. Wide receiver. You talked about Dante Cephas. Came out last week. Huge 2-touchdown performance. They weren't just 2 touchdowns either. Like they were very impressive, both of those.
yeah.
Opposite corners of the end zone. Keandre Lambert-Smith, you also mentioned, has been the guy all year. He's been looking for another partner in crime. And Harrison Wallace III, who was supposed to be that guy, has been hurt on and off. Is Cephas that guy now? Like, is this going to be a consistent thing? Like, is that what you're expecting against Michigan?
It's hard to tell. I think it very well could be if I had to guess. And you mentioned Harrison Wallace's injury. It's very unfortunate, and I think this game would be a lot scarier had Dante Cephas not stepped up, because before that, we were kind of thinking, oh, he's taken a long time to kind of develop. Liam Clifford hasn't really done much. No one's really done anything outside of, Keandre and Trey Wallace. And like you said, those touchdowns were not easy. The first one was one-handed, and even though he said he knew he caught it, I'm I don't know if he did, but you know 6 receptions. It was like 50 yards, 2 touchdowns, second on the team behind Keandre. I think he was like one of the only, I think him and Keandre were the only 2 receivers to record a catch. I think Amari Evans had one. Um, I, I just think it really could be a consistent basis, especially if Michigan dials up cover zero like Penn State feasted against Maryland. Granted, Michigan will probably do it as always at a higher level than a Maryland team, but I think if they see that look, Penn State really found its footing against man coverage, these blitz package looks where there's little to no safety help. And I think that's where Dante Cephas really is going to make his money here. And so I think if Michigan does send a lot of that, you know, and even future opponents, Dante Cephas could become a regular productive option for Drew Aller here.
Yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb and say Michigan is not going to run cover zero as much as Maryland did. If they had watched that game film, I think that's like pretty clear that Penn State probably plays its best football against that coverage. Dante Cephas. I mean, like you said, he is not going to be a deep threat like Keandre Lambert-Smith. I don't think he's that type of receiver. He's a guy maybe shallow across the middle of the field, perfect when you're going against man coverage, and there's no safety help there. I think that Michigan is going to rely pretty heavily on their secondary. I think they have a lot of trust in their defensive backs to kind of get the job done, especially considering you don't have to blitz as much when your front four is as dominant as it's been. Michigan's defensive line, even on the interior, is like incredible. There are some freaks of nature. You wouldn't see 6'4", 300-pound linemen moving the way they are most places, but Michigan has those guys. So I think that does relieve some pressure on their secondary. I do want to continue talking about that big boy ball that James Franklin discussed on Monday, and the importance of Katron Allen stepping up for good, maybe defining himself as that running back number one over Nick Singleton. Through this point, I know Franklin's not going to label him as such, but like after last week, it was 91 yards, 14 carries, and 1 touchdown for Allen. Is he the number one back now? Maybe unofficially?
Yeah, he's not going to say it, but Katron's played this year as the number one back. He's had 2 less carries than Nick Singleton this year, but almost 100 yards more. He's averaging almost 5 yards per carry. The only Penn State running back this season to have a 100-yard game, and he might not have that explosive like home run speed that Nick Singleton has, but we haven't seen it from Nick Singleton. And so, next best option is to have a guy who loves to hit people, make opponents scared of him, just go in there, lay a shoulder down, and he gets yards after carry. Like Olu said this week, it's nice to have a running back who can make something out of nothing essentially, and maybe alleviate some of that pressure on the offensive line when they do make a mistake. And you need that, like you said, against an opponent like Michigan and their front seven, their front four. It's just, and when you look at the last year's game, Penn State did not do a good job of that. But Katron Allen is just he can kind of even out that playing field, and even defensively, I think Penn State has gotten bigger. They've kind of really stressed, I think, after the last year's blowout loss to the Wolverines, where they let up over 400 yards rushing. Penn State leads the country in rushing, in the fewest rushing yards allowed. So I think that's an area they've really stepped up. And, it hasn't been against teams that don't run the ball. I mean, they played Iowa, and Iowa got nothing going on the ground. And they're a team that loves to run the football, always has these huge offensive linemen and tight ends that they just home grow from Iowa.
They love to run the football because I don't think they're capable of throwing the ball.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. They also have no choice. But yeah, I think, with Katron Allen kind of flipping the switch here and being this year's lead back compared to last season, it kind of evens things out all around.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Penn State needs. It's what James Franklin has wanted and said all along. You got to have a balanced offense. That's what made this whole season kind of interesting, is because I don't think they ever really had that balance. The problem in the beginning of the year with the offense, there are a couple of reasons. Obviously, wide receivers and not being able to get the passing game going was the major one. But another problem was that teams, for that reason, were targeting the run game, targeting Penn State's run game, given that, it was a success last year, and Penn State wasn't able to run the ball, even when teams knew that they were going to run. That's like how you kind of balance out an offense, is to execute even when the defense is maybe in the right position. Making the right decision and being safe and shipping away. And that was really Penn State's problem early on. So now that we've, seen Drew Aller, maybe do some things and get the job done on the offensive side, especially, whether it's on the ground or in the air. I think that does, kind of get rid of some pressure for Katron and Nick. I don't know what's happened with Nick Singleton. This is not the same guy that we saw last year. This was a guy that you could maybe rely on to break off for, at least a 50-yard rush a game. And that was supposed to be a huge component of this offense, especially an offense that had a first-year starting quarterback, need to create explosiveness somehow. And the run game just it really couldn't get it going. And Katron Allen's been great, but even he has not rushed for a 20-yarder yet this year, and it's been 9 weeks. I think he had 19-yard rush on Saturday, but
Yeah,
um,
it's not good when Tank Smith leads the team with the longest rush of the season.
yeah, exactly. But this is the time when they need a strike and come together. Um, Moving on, we've discussed all the facets. Let's do score predictions. What do you got, Zach?
I had Michigan 31, Penn State 17. I think this game is going to be close at halftime as Michigan kind of figures out what to do against a top 10 team. But then I think, the second half, both these teams have been great in the third quarter. And I think Michigan will pull away and score the first points that Penn State has allowed in the third quarter and just, kind of put this game on ice.
Yeah, I'm somewhat close to you there. I got 28-20. I think Penn State's gonna hang around. I think it'll be relatively competitive, but I don't think it'll ever feel as if Penn State is actually gonna finish the job. Um, I'm really interested to see how Michigan does because this is a team that's either a national contender, maybe the best team in the country, or maybe they've been fooling us all along against these not so great opponents. And I think Penn State's um, I think Michigan's a good team though. I think they're going to be able to show the Nittany Lions that they are complete and experienced and that they're not letting this scandal get to them. And I think Penn State is just not as good. No, straight up on paper. I just don't think things have aligned as well as they have for Michigan team that's won the last two Big Ten titles. That'll do it for us. Want to know pod brought to you again by Student Affairs. We will talk to you guys next week after the game. Obviously, there's going to be a ton to discuss whether they win or lose. So we'll chat then. Thanks for stopping by.